first conversation this morning talking with representatives of the religious community about the recent amendment made to the Misuse of Drugs Act, which allows for the decriminalization of small portions of marijuana. I have with me on set Reverend Lance Lewis, who is a representative of the National Evangelical Association of Belize, and we have a member of the Jesuit community in Belize, Father Brian Christopher. Good morning and welcome.
Thank you.
Now, let's start off a bit with part of the presentation that was made last week with the press conference by the churches, putting out your official position on the amendment.
We sent a document to the Prime Minister May 2016 advising him about the effects of what marijuana will have on decriminalizing if we went that way. There are studies showing there are over 200 pastors within the National Evangelical Association of Belize who had signed on and saying that, you know, we are in agreement that any decriminalization of marijuana will be detrimental to the society as a whole. Mm-hmm. We did not hear back. We hoped to hear back from him, but it just did not happen. And we were expecting to hear something. Then I personally heard about the bill that was coming up to decriminalize marijuana. I wrote a text or email to the senator for the churches, and he said that, could you send a copy of the bill? He said, we have not reached that stage as yet, but I'll send you as soon as possible. Well, I don't think I've gotten it. I've gotten it, but not from him. Mm-hmm. And so I made a plan to have a forum on this marijuana decriminalization. So we got an attorney. He came along and brought a senior superintendent, Bart Jones, and they discussed the whole matter and showed us what the bill was talking about. We then I personally and others got the impression that this was going to circulate around the nation, which it is seemingly going to do, but I did not think it would have happened before the bill became law. Mm-hmm. And so when we got wind, some people started saying, you know, this thing might happen soon. I said, no, man, they've not sort of given the whole country a little idea of what they're doing. So it won't come yet. But then we got wind that it was coming. And so we put together a plan to have this press conference last Tuesday and put out our whole feeling about the matter and the facts.
Which is incidentally just a couple days before the amendment was actually passed in the House. Now, I think that's very crucial information, because one of the accusations made on the church is that you seemed like you showed up late to the party. That your position when presented was after the announcement was made, after there were particular motions being set in place indicating that this would have been brought to the House. So what you're saying is you initiated your consultations from May.
May 2016.
May last year.
2016, yes.
Now, what needs to be clear is what type of consultation took place with members of the church to find out exactly what their sentiments were about the potential decriminalization of marijuana.
Well, the booklet said, you know, there is scientific research done to show how detrimental marijuana would have, and that places, maybe states that have done it, have started to see an effect, a downward effect, negative effect on the population. So we looked at that. We had medical journal articles. All of that was in the package, which I do have on me. And so we figured that it would have been looked at from all angles, and then asked us to come to speak further on it, but that did not happen. When it came about with the CSC, the Church State, CSC, Church State Commission, we were talking about several things, and then that fell apart because two of the powerhouses fell out. We started to look at, you know, maybe decriminalization might be the next big move. And so I personally I heard that there was a plan coming for a bill, and I said I would like to see what it is. Sent an email, nothing came out of it.
Sent an email to whom?
To the church state,
Okay.
church senator.
Okay.
And the response, we have not reached so far as yet. Now we're talking about August. Not gotten a reply. But I did get a copy of the bill later on. And then that started to help us to move towards having a forum, which actually took place in Belmopan. And then we realized that now there's going to be a move to sensitize and educate people across the nation about this. And this would be done by Senior Superintendent Bart Jones.
Now, let's be very clear. What are your concerns about the move to decriminalize small portions of marijuana? And I can get both your perspectives here.
Yeah.
What are the main concerns? Let's start with you, Father Brian.
Well, I have to tell you, I have more questions than hard conclusions about this. And I would say that I don't, and I speak only for myself here, from a moral standpoint, I really don't see the urgency behind this. I'm more interested in a deeper question of addiction in general. And I don't know that I would classify marijuana, I don't know that the scientific community classifies marijuana as such a hardcore substance that we need to be so concerned about it. Some of the concerns that I do have, though, and I do have some concerns, and I do share some concerns with the rest of the churches here in Belize, have to do with just the availability of more intoxicating substances. Do we need that? On the other hand, I have to ask the question: if marijuana is decriminalized, is that really going to lead to an increase of use? That's an assumption, but I'm not sure if it's true. That's just a live question for me. So at this point, I would say that I have more questions than answers.
And for you?
For me, the fact that the legislation came about to say that you're decriminalizing 10 grams, which is smaller than 2 ounces, as in the case of Jamaica. And then you have not, it's illegal to plant marijuana, but you are legalizing it. In the case of Jamaica, they legalized it and allow you to plant 5 plants. That's what they did. And then they're working towards other things, maybe to decriminalize marijuana. But in Belize, we are surrounded by 2 major states. Mexican, with a population of about 60 million, Guatemala with about 14 million. Now, if you're saying it is illegal to plant marijuana, but it's legal now to smoke 10 grams of marijuana, where will you get it? Of course, there's illegal cultivation, but it will be an opportunity for people that want money to come in. It is already said that the use of marijuana or the desire for it has increased turf wars. And I think that it will make it worse because more people will want it. And I'm particularly concerned about the youth because the effects of marijuana on our young people is much more detrimental than adults. A child, and we are hearing now that children, even before 10, have used this. A child using marijuana, the effects on his or her life goes on for a very long time, and it does affect their brain. So my concern is the effect on our youths. And like any other youths, they will become driven to want to try this. And that will destroy our education.
If I could, I think your argument about the supply coming in from outside, I think that's a very interesting argument. I think that I'm also concerned about the use of drugs among youth, but I would put that in terms of alcohol or tobacco as well. I think that any kind of use of any kind of controlled substance like that at a young age is going to affect brain development, and it's going to make, the studies say that it makes young people, if you try it before the age of 16, you're a certain number of times more likely to develop an addiction later on. I don't know that decriminalizing it is going to make it more appealing to youth, or the counter argument would be that keeping it illegal actually makes it more appealing. There is something of the draw, we want things that we're told we can't have. So I think, again,
Well, this has
lots
been,
of questions with
and this has been a concern coming out. Also, we heard this from the business senator as well, about the potential increase in use of marijuana with children and young people. But you're right, there are no substantiated facts to be able to say that that will be the case or won't be the case.
Use has already gone up among young people.
And we do know from studies done through the Drug Council here in Belize that young people are already exposed to marijuana. But my question has to be, Reverend Lewis, you spoke so clearly about recognizing what I think people are all now aware of, the clear gaps that exist with the legislation. We are allowed to possess a substance that you are not allowed to buy and you're not allowed to cultivate. And it seems to be that that's part of the concern that you expressed. Does that then mean if this legislation is enhanced to be able to put in proper protective mechanisms? There are already protective mechanisms for young people, but perhaps to be able to clearly regulate the process of purchasing and cultivating, that the church may be more amenable to working with the government on this issue or accepting the bill as is?
I have a problem with that point because I am against the smoking of marijuana or the use of marijuana in candies and bakes, whatever. When you smoke it, it goes to your bloodstream much faster than when it is in a fudge or whatever. It takes longer. So the effects go fast. So I am against the use of it.
You're against the use of marijuana?
Marijuana in terms of smoking or vaporizing and maybe ingesting. I'm against that. I am not against marijuana in terms of medical purposes, and I don't think the country has reached there yet to look at all these other areas. I think it is it's hemp really, and it can be used for material in terms of rope and other stuff. So that part they have not pursued, but they've gone.
Well, that's included in the bill, the industrial hemp and the medical marijuana.
Yeah, well, marijuana is hemp in a real sense. But the pushing to smoke, I think they should have backed off on that.
Now let's look at some of the justifications behind this amendment. And I think, as members of the religious community, it is a very realistic situation. We know young men, specifically young men in this country, including women, but more so young men, from vulnerable communities are oftentimes busted with small quantities of marijuana, receive a criminal record, may be unable to pay any fines and end up in jail, or don't pay fines and end up in jail later on down the road. And we see this particular marginalized community becoming victims of a system that this may perhaps be able to curtail. How do you respond to that particular objective of the legislation, to be able to allow young men who this is a part of their lives and they have grown up in families and homes where it's okay to have a chance?
I mean, I think that's a very real objection, and I think that is a big moral concern. I don't know that I would argue against it. I think that if we're going to criminalize the use of marijuana, it ought to be enforced across socioeconomic lines. And if we as a society can't do that for whatever reason, I think that's a bigger problem than whether people are smoking weed or not.
So you're more of the, you're saying that you would prefer to see a fair enforcement of criminalized marijuana.
Correct.
But that was before last week.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I would want to see some type of, all right, you smoke marijuana, you should still pay a penalty in some form or the other. But take off the criminal record, but let you know this is wrong. So now you're saying that it's not wrong now to have 10 grams of marijuana in your possession. So you're giving a greater push to want to use marijuana. There should have been some penalties. You can remove the criminal part of it, but they should be paying some penalties so that it is going to cost them something to do this. It's going to discourage them because there's a price to be paid. Now you can smoke it 10 grams and you get away with it.
Well, if caught, according to the amendment, there are regulations to come online that you'll receive a verbal warning, and if caught again, a fine, like your driving ticket that you may get.
I'm going to answer that. I think the legislation now will open the door for more use of marijuana and abuse. I've been to Jamaica 3 times since the legislation was passed. It was passed in 2015. And I've seen an increasing amount of persons on the street smoking marijuana. You go around Halfway Tree, all different places now. Now, so many people are smoking it. I don't think the police have time to check. So it creates a big problem for the police to be monitoring. And then you can now have police coming up and saying, well, you know, this is more than 10 grams. And if the person is not liked by the police, or it's this police just don't like this guy, he's going to make it look more than 10 grams. It's going to be a problem. And then the effects from the use of marijuana, because it does have brain effects, will cause more mental problems. Because one actual counselor in one of our schools in Belize City said last week that they have seen a drop in performance at that particular school. And it's a fact that marijuana does affect your brain, power, and other areas of your life. It affects your entire body when you get ingesting or actually smoking it. So I really am concerned seriously about the bill and the law that tells you that now you can get away with it. More people want to try it, and especially young people. And it's them that I'm concerned about, because they will damage themselves and damage the future of this nation.
I think for me, my deeper concern is less about whether marijuana is legal or decriminalized. It has to do with how we as a society care for people with the disease of addiction. If kids are using marijuana in large amounts, and if they're using it regularly, this is not a criminal problem. This is a public health issue, and we need to treat it as a public health issue. So my question for the government of Belize and for the policymakers, and especially those who have told the churches to stay out of it, is what are you going to do for people who suffer this disease? What are we going to do for the mental health of our youth? What are we doing, and what are the plans?
No, I wanted to tap into your experience here, because I know that you have worked with persons who suffer from addiction in Belize, or worked alongside them, I should say. And tell me a bit about the experience that you have found, and why that is a part of the concern that you have.
Again, I'm not great with statistics, but my understanding of addiction, as simple as it is that not everybody who undergoes some sort of trauma as a youth becomes an addict. But if you look at the population of addicts, whether you're addicted to alcohol or marijuana or crack, or if you're addicted to sex and pornography, or if you're addicted to shopping, there are a lot of things we can be addicted to. If you look at that population and you go back in their past, there's a strong correlation between trauma in the past and addictive acting out as an adult. So that raises a big question. If we're treating addictions as a criminal issue, we're missing the cause. The number of people addicted is not going to go down until we start addressing the causes. So we need to look at what's going on in the homes. We need to look at the fact that a lot of people can't get jobs, a lot of people can't provide for their kids. Kids are growing up in poverty. All of these things change the brain just as certainly as drugs and substances change the brain later on in life. We need to start attacking that, and we need to start giving people who grow up and who do have an addiction, we need to start giving them reasonable treatment options. To my knowledge, they don't really exist here.
Now, you have spoken and you touched on an issue that I did want to cover this morning, and I know, Reverend Lewis, you did provide a statement to the news yesterday in responding to the Attorney General, and I completely paraphrase what he's saying, where he says, just stay out of the development of policies and legislation in the country. And, let's not mince words here. There has been at different times a strong relationship between the church and state, and at other times a strained relationship, especially when we're talking about the education sector. When you hear the statements of the Attorney General, and it goes beyond him, some people in the public say it as well, what is your reaction?
His speech was vitriolic, a lot of ash, really, and really coming out against the church. And as if to say, well, there should be no criticism of this, and you guys come out and criticize it, and you have no real moral authority to do it. It was a very bad statement. And then to say, no, you have to, if you want to get into legal things, get into politics. So everybody should be politicians. That don't make sense. And so is the government saying that we don't want it to question what we do, we don't want it to talk about it, we don't want it to come against it. Is this democracy? No, 1,000 times no. We should be free to view our opinion about certain legislation and disagree. You cannot have all the people agreeing with you. That would not be right. And so for him to make that very serious statement against the church is just part of...
It's laughable.
Yes, it's pathetic.
I mean, come on. Yes, I'm not a policy expert. I'm not a policy wonk, and I don't pretend to be. But for politicians to pretend that this issue doesn't have a moral dimension, and I'm sorry, are politicians now the moral voice of the nation? I mean, no offense, but I mean, come on.
Mm-hmm. Now, this is a very, and I said it, I've said it in other segments as well, this is seen as a very popular decision. I don't have statistics to say that there's a poll conducted. I don't have any substantiated evidence, but I think from the pulse that we feel with the people, it seems to be a very popular decision. It had bipartisan support in the House. We saw some of the senators not support the amendment, and for varying reasons, from a weak legislation to the concerns of young people and children, and also, of course, the moral standpoint of the church. I believe that people begin to question whether or not the church is being representative of its parishioners when you make a position like this. And that's why I started off with what was the consultation that took place. When someone questions, are you speaking on behalf of yourself and your interpretation of any Bible, or are you speaking on behalf of your parishioners?
I don't believe that the church is a representative institution. We're not a democratic institution. We've never made that claim. Mm-hmm. I think that I understand my role, Pastor Lewis. I don't know if he would say the same thing. I understand my role as a Catholic priest as one of helping people form their conscience. Mm-hmm. So helping people ask the questions that they need to be asking. Adults, we're talking, helping adults ask the questions they need to be asking, helping adults go back to the sources, going back to Scripture, going back to tradition, to really discern what God's will is. That's my job. It's not my job to say, well, 95% of my parishioners think this, and therefore I'm going to support this issue. Mm. No,
in my case, this came out of the National Evangelical Association of Belize. A document is there to show that over 200 signed on to this. So in a sense, I'm representing the views and the feelings of the NEAB, and to some extent, the greater part of the church, I would think. Because the church is concerned about what happens to our society, and things that will come up that will bring further decline morally and spiritually. Because use of marijuana might not necessarily give you a spiritual high. It will give you an emotional high, and then it drops, but you have to constantly take it to keep high. Christ does more than that. Christ keeps you in line with him, because you pray, you read the Word of God, you contribute to society, to change society, you make things different, and you point people to Jesus Christ, because the Word of God says, therefore, if any man be in Christ, he is a new creature. I became a Christian, and nobody told me that I should not do X, Y, and Z. But reading the Bible started to drop off the things that I used to drink, I used to smoke. Those things that started to drop off. In fact, my school friends said, what happened? Something gone wrong with you? I didn't answer them. And then they started to accuse me of being a Christian, which I didn't have any problem with accepting. But they were the ones who came along and said, this guy changed. Because it happened at school. So I am really passionate about keeping marijuana out of the purview of youths in particular, because I see what will happen to them. And this society needs all the brain power that it can get to develop this country that has a long way to go, but has a potential to go to the greater heights. Marijuana will bring it low.
Now, Reverend Lewis, you said something very telling there, and I have to explore it further. Obviously, you speak of the changes you made within your own life as you became a Christian. So what can you say of your own personal experience having smoked in the past and what effect it really had on your life?
Well, I'll tell you about the smoking. I smoked, and I've been to Blue Mountain Peak several times. And I knew, when I went there one time, this friend of ours gave us packs of cigarettes, and I know the smoking had an effect on our breathing. Cigarette might have a greater addiction than marijuana. That's, I think, a fact. And alcohol might have a greater addiction. But any of these things is a way to make you fall out of society. And marijuana is even more so than even cigarettes, because you start to lose control. Even driving, you lose control of your real, sense of distance and time.
Well, I'm sure users will argue with you, but I think, the issue at this point is really this. The amendment has been made, and I hear the concerns coming out from the moral standpoint, from the unanswered questions in terms of where the legislation is lacking. Where do you see yourselves now as members of the church, as representatives of the church, since the amendment has been put through, the decriminalization now exists? What do you expect to be your particular role at this juncture?
Yeah. Again, I don't know that I'm against the decriminalization of marijuana. I think that it should be treated much along the same lines as alcohol. I see it as sharing many of the same negative effects as alcohol in a society. I think the deeper issue is addiction in general.
So, Father Brian, what I'm hearing from you is that you would like to hear some kind of contingency plan, something to be able to supplement what already exists with addiction, with marijuana, alcohol, or whatever drug.
Yes, that would be fair to say.
Okay. That's where your biggest concern lies,
Correct.
Not so much with the less than 10 grams.
People are going to smoke marijuana, whether it's legal, whether it's illegal. I think the deeper issue is, what are we going to do for people who have the disease of addiction?
And this is an opportunity for the government or for the leaders in our country to perhaps have the political will to introduce perhaps rehab centers or some kind of program.
Yes, that would be wonderful if they were to start thinking in that direction.
Okay. Reverend Lewis, you're saying something different.
I'm saying that marijuana, alcohol, other drugs, I'm against it. We have, as a church, stood up against it. We have members from our church who put out ads against the use of alcohol. So to hear statements as if, were you guys saying about that? I was not old enough when the legislation came about alcohol. I think it was in the United States to allow it to happen. I have seen the effects of alcohol in my own family because my uncle, my father, several others were drinkers. I myself started that way, but thank God that Christ came into my life and made a difference. So I really am against any other thing coming up. It's not that we are not against alcohol, we are against it in as much as marijuana. We're against alcohol, cocaine, and all these drugs. But now to add something else to it is pushing more pressure on the system, and you will have to find rehab centers. Police will have more work to do, and more problems will come up because there will be debate about how much marijuana you have. It's just a big pot of
So from a moral standpoint, just to have as much clarity as possible, you are saying that the church, which I think one expects, has a no drug, advocates for no drug use.
no drug use,
Yes.
no alcohol use.
The state is now at the point where they're saying they recognize there is usage, they recognize there is unjust persecution of particular members of society, and there's a small quantity that is now allowed for with the potential of a slap on the wrist. So, given the fact that the legislation has been amended, what will be your role now as a representative of the Evangelical Association of the churches with members of your church and the wider community?
Members of the church know that we don't agree with alcohol, tobacco,
Any drug.
any drug.
Yeah.
But it's going to be harder to get more young people in the church because they're seeing that, well, the church is against LGBT, now the church is against marijuana, so they will stay away. It's going to be hard, and if they get caught in it, then their mind will turn them off because Satan comes into the picture and he now pulls them down morally and physically and mentally they go down. So their response, the work of the church, will have to be much more prayer because the situation will become much greater. There are so many things trapping our young people. The internet is good, but it also has its bad side. Suicide, a lot of things. Too many of our young people are going down the drain. Too many have committed suicide and are being influenced to commit suicide. Too many are starting to use alcohol. I've been to schools where several different bottles of drink turn out to be alcohol. Bags of marijuana that was seized. Now, with this legislation, they will still have marijuana come into the school.
It will still be illegal.
Yes. Yeah, but it will give the young person some feeling that it's not so bad after all, so we will try it, not necessarily at school, we will try it before coming to school. So it will bring us down. We will have to, as a church, be more telling people more information about this and pray harder and evangelize more. I don't see any other option.
Well, I fail to see where there's more action, and that's what I was trying to get at. If there's any further action coming from the religious community outside of just recognizing that perhaps your message needs to be louder on, with your particular members of your church in not using drugs.
Right, but we need to go outside of our church because we have been called to preach the gospel, not in just the church, because the church is where you come to hear disciples. But outside the church, we need to go. I mean, I've been exposed to marijuana in the sense of trying to reach Rastafarians. I remember in 1970s, I was associate pastor of a church in Kingston, and we were dealing with the young people. I encountered some Rastafarians, and they started. It was one at first, and then about 4 came, and they were using chillum pipes. They were smoking. But in 1975, 76, the THC level of the marijuana, because they smoked it in front of me, they were using their pipes, and it did not affect me too much. But if that same thing happened today, then you would say I'm on a high, because the THC level in the marijuana has gone to about 30% or more, and it's climbing. So the detriment and the danger of making a bill at this time.
I don't know if we can say that. There is no certainty behind that, but I think. One of the points I wanted to look at. You have no certainty in terms of the quantity of THC within.
It has risen.
They're different, of course, but there are different types of marijuana with different levels of THC.
Generally, the THC level has risen.
But there are different types, and some are stronger than others. So I don't want to misrepresent the facts here. I hear what you're saying, but I have one final point, and I think it's really important. One of the beautiful things of living in this country and Belize. Is that we have the freedom of association, which means there are people in this country who choose not to be associated with a church. When the church speaks out against a particular policy that is meant for the wider public, it is very understandable where others will say, well, you don't represent me. I choose not to be a part of the Evangelical institution, the Catholic institution, the Baptist institution, the Methodist, Buddhist, whatever is present in the country. How do you respond to that?
I look inwardly and I say that as a church we have been failing because more people now accepting things that are below par means that the church message has not been reaching them. And so our work is now much greater and there's a lot of catching up to do.
Okay. All right. So final message as we close off this segment. Let's start with you, Reverend Lewis.
The bill is a backward step in the moral outlay of the nation. It is also a backward step in terms of the effects it will have. More people fighting for drugs, to sell it, to get it, it's illegal now. I suppose maybe near term they will pass legislation to make it legal, legalize marijuana, but right now it is not so, and so the supply will be coming from Tom, Dick, and Harry. And I see our young people really having a bigger challenge to try to perform at the level that we want them to perform, because marijuana will help them to not perform, and they will perform below par. It's a serious problem, and we have to now call upon God to come to our aid in a greater way.
Father Brian?
I think at this moment in the history of Belize, I think we have a real challenge on our hands, and I think this is an opportunity right now for the government of Belize, well, for all of us as a society, but the government of Belize to recognize that there's a public health crisis here, and the crisis is one of addiction. And whether it's to alcohol or to marijuana or whatever it is, there's a crisis. And what are they going to do about it? But it's not just a challenge to the government, it's a challenge to the churches too. What are we going to do about it? So you ask, how are we going to respond? My thought would be, we need to redouble our efforts to reach out to people who are suffering this disease, and we need to provide them a way of recovering from it. Part of that is going to mean we need to educate ourselves about what addiction is and what resources there are.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you very much for coming in and sharing your positions on this issue. We appreciate you taking the time to do so.
Thank you.
All right. We're going to go ahead and take a break. And when we come back, we'll be talking about an upcoming Women's Leadership Conference coming up.